It's time now for the Retirement Playbook with Rick and Granger Hughes from the Hughes Retirement Group.
Welcome to the Retirement Playbook. I'm your host, James Howard, alongside these wonderful, fine gentlemen. I've known them for years, Rick and Granger Hughes. Over the next half hour, okay, I want you to pay attention. We're going to be discussing planning for successful retirement and why it's so important to know what you're about to learn here in the next 28 and a half minutes, because so many people in this country are missing the mark. Here's what's in store. It's about building your retirement plan, a written retirement plan. We're going to discuss income, of course, taxes, and of course, growth strategies, plus how market volatility can change your outlook. But first, let's meet Rick and Granger Hughes, the father-son duo that's a part of this wonderful team in our community at the Hughes Retirement Group, a Chattanooga area firm that focuses on preparing people just like you for retirement. Rick and Granger are also popular radio show hosts. All right, let's get started, guys.
We're excited to be here with you, James.
I'm glad you guys are here. All right, once we hit retirement, Rick, the paychecks stop, but the bills don't. So how important is it to replace your paycheck in retirement?
Probably the most important thing you can do.
That is.
You've been used to getting. So imagine if you had a job and you got laid off and the check stopped, you'd be in a panic mode, wouldn't you? I've got to find another job. So the same situation, you're going into retirement, you've got to create a check. Now, where's that check going to come from? More than likely, it'll come from Social Security. It may come from a pension or something that you've created, a pension on your own or your 401k. So creating that check is vitally important to reduce your stress, okay? Because the bills still have to be paid, correct?
Right, exactly. So, but Granger, those who are watching right now, and they've been saying this for years, okay, I've got a pension, and I know I'm going to start taking out of Social Security. There's other things to factor in to this.
And I mean, look, if people that maybe have the old pensions, maybe their pension's really lucrative, and maybe their Social Security is substantial enough. But at the end of the day, most people, I would say, that are retiring today that we come in contact with, it's some type of 401k, 403b, simple SEP, something like that. And you've got this bucket of money, and it can look pretty large. You may say, hey, wow, I've got $1 million, I got $1.5 million, $2 million, whatever it is, and you feel good about it. But now you're tasked with the responsibility of, okay, I got to make this last, and I don't know what's going to happen in the markets. How am I allocated? What is my risk profile looking like? And so when it comes to creating income or filling those gaps, so maybe Social Security and pension fill 75% of your income need, but we need to fill that other 25%. And one of the things that I think that we do, we try to look, and we're looking at what's best for the client, not what's best for Rick and Granger, but we want to make sure that if there's a tool out there that can fill that income gap, we want to utilize it. And sometimes that's an annuity, sometimes that's using dividends, sometimes it's using interest payments from short-term notes. But there's different ways to accomplish it. But I think it's very important because we've had people come into our office before, and I know, Dad, you would say this, where they've said, oh, I don't want this, or I don't want that. My friend told me it's not good. And that's okay, but I would also caution you to say, is your friend going to write you a check if you run out of money? And so I think when you're looking at tools, to keep somewhat of an open mind to say, okay, if I do need to create income, there's a place to go to transfer that risk and essentially have a contract where this company is going to give me a check as long as I live.
And all it is, James, like he's saying, it's a tool. So imagine again if we were going to nail a nail into the wall here. We could use a lot of things. We could use your shoe, right? Yeah. We don't want to use your head by any means, okay?
It's hard enough.
But we could use a flathead screwdriver. We could use a Phillips screwdriver. The best tool would be a hammer. So it's a matter of finding out, and that's what Granger and I do, find out what is the best tool for you. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not the same for everyone.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions with folks that you sit down to face? Are they saying, I've saved all this money, I'm ready to retire in a couple of years, so I guess I can just divvy it out when I turn 65 or 70 or?
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about this on prior shows where you hear people say historically the markets have done this. Well, number one, when we talk about the markets, what does that mean? Are we talking about the S&P 500? Are we talking about the Dow, the NASDAQ? So that's a different thing. And it comes back to your asset allocation. What do you own, number one? Number two, does that match your risk tolerance? Number three, there's some conventional financial wisdom out there where people talk about the 4% rule. You can take out 4% every single year and maybe you won't run out of money. But is that realistic? Because we've also talked about in the past sequence of returns. If we get ready to retire, do you think our retirement's different if we have a 2008 a month before we retire? Of course it is. So I think it comes back to looking at those factors and saying, okay, how do I make this last? Now, once again, if we have our income needs taken care of, then we've kind of freed ourselves up to we're almost back to that contributory type mindset where we can weather the storms. We have time to wait for the markets to come back. We don't have to dip in a panic because we know our income need is met.
Talk to us about creating a multiple income stream.
Well, and again, James, this is what we would say is multiple. We've talked about those. Social Security would be a stream of income,
right,
correct? If you have a pension from your previous employer, that would be a stream. If you're going to create your own pension, there you have a stream, or maybe you have an IRA or a Roth or your 401k, whatever it may be. The more streams of income you have, the better. So the reason I say that, let's say you put all your stock, no pun intended, into the 401k or IRA. And we did have a 2008 again. And now you are in a panic because how long is it going to take me to recover? But if you have other streams of income, and I think fixed income options are very good because, again, it helps reduce the stress. Like right now, you probably know when you get your next paycheck exactly what it's going to be. Yeah. That makes you feel comfortable. You don't want any guessing games, and they come back and say you're getting $500 less. So, the fixed income strategy can be very stress-free for you.
One thing I would add to that, and I mean, to kind of piggyback on your sports background and mine, you watch these games and maybe you start out, you get off to a slow start and you're down 10, 15, 20 points. It doesn't mean the game's over, but you're going to have to expend a lot of energy just to get that game back to where it started. And it's the same thing in retirement, where if we have a 40% decline, which is not uncommon, we've seen that in the market, we have a 40% decline. Well, what do I now need to return just to get back to where I started? You would need a 67% return just to get back to where you started, not a 40% return. Well, what if you were also taking distributions during that time? So you're climbing uphill, and you're making it more difficult by doing that because you're now not 30 or 40 where you're contributing no matter what happens. And that's one of the things I think as retirees, they've been wired their entire life, which is not a bad thing. If the markets are up, I'm contributing to my 401k. If they're down, I'm putting money in. If they're neutral, I'm putting money in. But now we shift into the retirement phase. If the markets are up, the markets are down, markets are sideways, I'm taking money out. Yep. And that drastically changes the game.
Yeah, I love the sports analogy, and I know you can relate to it. When it comes to a game plan, that's what you guys are pros at, obviously, and that's what we're talking about. But you incorporating your coaching skills, what you've done for 30 plus years.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, James, if I go back to my coaching days, and Granger played, so he had various coaches, and you played. Your coach usually developed a game plan, and you went out and practiced. And then the game came along, and you tried to implement the game plan. Now, the other team's doing the exact same thing, right? So you may have to make adjustments during the course of the game or halftime, whenever it may be. That's what we do in retirement planning. We're building a plan that's going to last you till the age of 95 at least, but we know we're going to have to probably make some adjustments. An example I want to use is in the previous election, when inflation was 1.4 and then inflation went to 9.2, we didn't have plans developed for 9.2% inflation, so we had to make adjustments along the way. And that's what we'll do. We'll use my coaching background, and we'll use it in retirement planning. Yeah, totally. So I have people all the time at church, they still call me coach, and they'll say, do you miss coaching? And I'll say, I'm still coaching. It's just a different type of coaching.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Setting a different type of game plan. All right, Coach, phone number and website. How can we connect with you?
423-641-0999, HughesRetirementGroup.com, or scan the QR code.
So one of the most critical components for a successful retirement is avoiding big losses, right, Granger?
Absolutely. I mean, I think everybody kind of knows that that's part of the game, but it's not an all or nothing game either. You don't have to go 100% defensive to avoid big losses. And that's what we talk about when we talk about assembling a core portfolio that's aligned with your risk tolerance, your risk profile. And we take people through a series of question scenarios. I want to know how you would feel if you saw $50,000 gone today. I want to know how you would feel. How would you react if you saw $100,000 loss. We remember COVID, it wasn't that long ago, where it just seemed like it was a nosedive at some days. So we really want to know that we're aligned that way. And we have to understand that, once again, historically, the kind of common knowledge out there is the markets have always returned to normalcy. But as we've mentioned so many times, there's a difference between contributing and distributing. So I think it's important to assemble our portfolio. One of the things that we do for our clients, obviously, we try to use that non-emotional, methodical, mathematical approach. And then, as we mentioned in the past, there's different things that we kind of ladder that with, similar to CDs in some respects, like short-term bonds or notes, things of that nature. But things that we're hedging for the downside to kind of avoid or mitigate some of those losses.
Yeah. And Granger, you said a key word, emotion.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of people invest based on emotion. Back when, if we go after 2008, the longest bull run in history, a lot of people were willing to take on a lot of risk because the market every day was just doing great. And then when it became volatile, well, I don't want a lot of risk. So again, the biggest thing that we say is let's don't get caught up in the emotions. We got to think of the long run.
That totally makes sense. All right. So I want to ask you this, Rick. Why do you feel so many retirees overlook their risk level?
I think, again, when they first got their job, they wanted to be more, obviously, and that was a good reason, more aggressive. You're trying to accumulate. And then you get to the point where it's preservation time. If you get in that retirement red zone, maybe 5 years out or so forth, and then, as Granger said, you get in the distribution phase. So we see a lot of people that come in that want to dial back the risk, and it depends on how they're invested. If it's all in the market, if it's all in stocks, then again, they may want to dial back the risk a little bit. But if they have some fixed income strategies, they may want the risk to be a little bit more and see if they can get some growth in there.
So how can we discover our portfolio? How can we make sure that it survives the next big market correction?
So what we actually do when we're testing these portfolios, which I love using tools like this, is we bring somebody in, we sit down, we look at their individual holdings, how much they have of each of that holding. And then we basically run it through a simulation, and it tells them, kind of what's going to happen. And I can sit there and say, if you owned these funds that you own now, just keep it simple. Here's how much you would have lost during COVID. Here's how much you would have lost in 2008. Here's how much you would have made in 2017. So you can visually see how those holdings have performed. And the thing I think is difficult for some people to understand is they may have changed funds 15 times in their 401k. But what we're looking at is what they own right now. And what they own right now, it could have a 15, 20, 30, 40-year history. And I want to look back and I want to see, okay, how has this type of fund or how is this type of ETF, stock, whatever it is, how has it weathered the past 40 years? And then we can kind of visualize and say, okay, because we want to look in real dollars. Let's be honest, James. You log into your account. If you see red, does that create a different emotion than if you see green? Obviously. And
I want to see green.
And a lot of us, green, we feel good. We're like, okay, great. But that red hurts a little bit more. It just does. It could be this dollar for dollar, the same amount, but you see that red and you're thinking, oh gosh, that's not good. So I want to create kind of those emotions in that meeting because I want to feel, how do you really feel? Because I may not have known this client during COVID. I may not have known them during 2008. I want to know how they would have reacted if that happened.
Because it's all about maximizing our retirement wealth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The main thing there, James, again, you're trying to put yourself in a position where you're going to have enough money during retirement. Now, it would be easy for us to tell you, if you could say, I'm going to die in 5 years, it'd be easier to build a portfolio. But if we're trying to build a portfolio that will last you until the age of 95, sometimes it can be challenging. And that's why it's important. I think the number one question is, how much net income do you need in retirement? And then we look at the portfolio and start breaking it down and seeing where the sources or streams of income can come from.
Mm-hmm. I want to, this is a previous show, and you talked about it briefly, going in retirement and getting back to just setting out that budget before you even retire. You pretend like you're going to retire,
right?
And stick to that budget for a couple of years. But some things that you talked about, debt, and some of those, some of the debts that we need to make sure it's paid off before we get into retirement. What does that look like?
Well, again, I think when you're going into retirement, if at all possible, you do not want a mortgage. Okay, and we have clients that have mortgages. Okay, if you do, hopefully it's short-lived. It's not something that you just got a 30-year mortgage or a 20-year mortgage. Right. Your vehicles are high-ticket items usually. Now, sometimes we'll have people say, I want to buy a new vehicle, and that's fine. It's your money. We always say it's your money. We're going to try to manage and do what we can to make sure you have enough to last you through lifetime. But if you can reduce those two items, all of us are going to have utility bills, phone bills, that sort of thing. That's always going to be there. But those are two big ticket items right there that can drain that income real quick. And if we're out of debt, it's going to be much smoother.
All right, when we sit down with you guys on just a consultation, what's the first thing that you look at?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is try to build a relationship and trust, okay? And then it's going to be an educational process. We're going to ask, what's your goals, James? What's your goals? What's your objectives? What are you trying to accomplish during retirement? And then at some point, obviously, we're going to look at your statements that you have and see what you actually have. And then we're going to ask you, and I already pretty much know the answer, James, how much net income do you need in retirement? I know I've mentioned it a bunch of times, but it's how important it is. Yeah. And you go, well, I think we don't want any thinking on that. We want to know. And so we're going to
concrete.
We want concrete.
Sure.
So we're going to hand you a budget form, and we're either going to work through it right there, or if you would rather go home and private and do it and put pen to paper, then that's fine, and we would get back together. So we have to start at that point, but the biggest thing is the trust and the relationship. If we got to know that we can work with you, and you got to feel comfortable you can work with us.
Granger, give us a number where we can connect with you guys.
Yeah, so it's 423-641-0999, or obviously you can visit us at HughesRetirementGroup.com, or there could be a QR code there on the screen for you.
All right, first of all, when it comes to clarifying something, what's the difference between a tax preparer and a tax planner?
To clarify, I'm not going to file your taxes for you.
I'm always asking tax questions.
Tax preparer is a reactive approach. You've already, made your income, whatever you've done that year, you're giving it to someone. It's a reactive approach. They're, Dad's mentioned this before. It's data input, and they're saying, here's how much you owe. Mm-hmm. Tax planner is where you're kind of being proactive. You're saying, hey, here's some ways where we could save in the future, James, or hey, here's some ways where maybe we're not going to save this year, but we could save next year. So you're looking for avenues. We've talked about the tax mapping process of, okay, we've got some wiggle room. We could do $20,000, $30,000 in a Roth conversion year. That's more of a proactive planning approach.
Yeah. So why is tax planning such a focus on the wealthy?
I think, again, the wealthy, we look at them from a standpoint of they understand taxes. Mm-hmm. Most of the time they are ones paying the taxes. They're not necessarily getting refunds. So again, they're in a position where they're trying to gain as much knowledge as they can in order to try to reduce the amount of taxes. Because as we've said before, when you write Uncle Sam that check, they're not sending it back to you. So it's important, again, that they obviously are setting themselves up in that position.
Yeah, and we've got taxes, of course, coming at us, tax 401ks, RMDs, IRAs. Yeah. What do we need to look for?
Well, the first thing I would say, so when we're looking at 401ks or we're looking at traditional IRAs, it's different than a Roth IRA. RMDs are what's coming from that, okay? That's where that required minimum distribution, the government's saying, hey, congratulations, James, you did a phenomenal job saving all your life. We're going to take our cut now. And this is where we want to start looking for this, because then you can get into a situation where you want to obviously save yourself some money. You want to reduce that taxable liability if you can, but you also want to look ahead to the future, and we have a lot of clients that do this, where you're looking at your kids. How much from that 401k or traditional IRA in tax is your kid going to have to pay? And with the elimination of the stretch IRA, that tax bill has drastically increased. So, I won't get into the details of that right now, but those are things that we need to look at. But once again, I would say this, James, when we talk about looking for certain things, math. We're looking at math here. Mathematically, there's an ideal amount to have in your taxable bucket, things that are generating a 1099, long-term, short-term gains, ordinary income, tax-deferred, 401ks, traditional IRAs, 457 simples, and tax-free. Roth could be a Roth IRA contribution, conversion, Roth 401k. So there's a mathematically ideal amount. I'm not going to tell you on the show. And it depends on what other sorts of income you have. What other sorts of income you have, the combination of income. But there's a mathematically ideal amount that we believe that you want to have in each bucket, especially in a rising tax rate environment.
Okay. Well, so in what ways can people reduce their taxes when it comes to possibly saving?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you hear about is Roth conversions.
Right.
So there's a couple different things, and without getting too far off here, Dad's talked about in the past long-term care. He's talked about that quite a bit. There's life insurance vehicles out there where you can essentially contribute to that. You're not getting a deduction today, but you can take distributions from the cash value tax-free. You could access it for long-term care, but the kicker is if you pass away, you're talking about tax-free wealth passed on. Then we look at that Roth conversion. How much can I shift? Dad's mentioned this before. You could have $10 million and say, I want to do a Roth conversion today. Nobody's going to stop you. The government's going to say, come on and do it, but be prepared to pay the taxes. And we've done, these retirement classes for so many years, and you wouldn't believe how many people come in and say, I want to do Roth conversions. And then I sit there and say, here's how much you would have to pay in tax to do that. And they're, whoa, I got to pay tax? You're going to pay tax at some point, but there still is opportunity. You have to say, do I think, let's say, for instance, 22% tax is better for me to pay today than potentially 44% tax 20 years from now? That's a question you got to ask yourself.
And James, I would say this. People that are thinking about Roth conversions right now, the tax code we're under expires this year, December 31st, midnight. There's a good chance Congress is going to extend those tax cuts at least through the Trump presidency, okay? So now probably would be a good time to begin looking at a Roth conversion, but there's a systematic way to do it. As Granger said, you wouldn't want to do 10 million or you wouldn't want to do $1 million. That's where the tax mapping comes in, and we're able to sit down and say, okay, you need to do X, and we ought to do that over the next 5 years.
Okay. Yeah. It's not for everybody. Right. I mean, everybody's different.
If you're making $400,000 a year, that Roth conversion is going to be more expensive than somebody who's making $50,000. Yeah. So you have to be able to look at that and say, okay, if I do $50,000 in conversion, the government's going to look at it as you made $50,000. Simply put. Mm-hmm. So you made $50,000, you did a $50,000 conversion, the government looks at it, you made $100,000. So finding that right balance to say, okay, here's the amount I need to move this year, and as he mentioned, systematically, that may become an annual event.
I told you you're going to learn a lot during this show. All right, I know we have a few more minutes left with you guys, but I really want you to connect with Rick and Granger and their team. Give us a website, give us a phone number.
HughesRetirementGroup.com. Call us at 423-641-099 or scan that QR code. We'll look forward to hearing from you.
I'm glad we can rely on you guys to do the math. Now, I know aviation math, but there's a lot of math involved, and it's so important to connect with you guys to do the math and to put those numbers in those systems to see what's right for that each individual.
It is. I always tell Dad, I was like, this is kind of like the most interesting man in the world. He's a pilot. He's a climber. He's in submarines. I don't know.
Hot air balloon now. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, math is important, and I think the thing about math is 2 + 2 is 4, right? I mean, we're not biased with it. We're just looking at the numbers. There's times we've had people come in, we've tested their portfolio, and we said, hey, look, you're in a good spot. Could you make a couple tweaks and changes and probably improve it? You could, but overall, you're in a good spot. And I think for people to be able to visualize that, I mean, I think seeing real numbers when we're testing a portfolio, especially when we talk about running out of money, if I show you a result that says, James, you've got a 54% chance of meeting your goal, how good do you feel about that? Like if you were coming on over the speaker on Delton, guys, we got about a 54% shot of getting there. How do you think everybody
would not make your passengers happy?
Would not. So how do we improve that? And a lot of times it's as simple as math. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of dive into the statistics that are involved with risk. So everybody can say I'm in a conservative, moderate, aggressive fund, but what does that really mean? Yeah. We look at the math behind that, the nuts and bolts behind that, and then we try to assemble a portfolio accordingly.
Rick, just a few days ago, I was in a conversation with a family member, and we were talking for about an hour and a half about a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, and they were asking me questions. Let's talk about long-term care when it comes to
expensive.
It is unbelievably expensive. So how do you plan for that?
I would say, first of all, James, most people don't plan for it, and that's pretty sad. Granger when we do our classes, we usually always talk about long-term care. We think it's important because here's what people generally think of. Let's just say you had $1 million portfolio, you're married, and you say, honey, you know, when we retire, we're going to do this and that. We're going to travel, and you know there's an expense there, and we're going to have a great time. We're going to enjoy life, okay? But one day, life throws you a curveball. And when that curveball hits, if you need some type of long-term care, it's going to be very, very expensive, okay? I'll give you an idea. Here in Hamilton County, you're looking at $100,000 plus for a private room. If you go assisted living, about half that, and if you were to stay at home, again, about half that. But you can see there's an expense. Now, when life threw, let's say, the husband a curveball, and let's just for a hypothetical case, say he was in the nursing home for 4 years. We know that's almost $500,000, might be $500,000. It's eating up the portfolio, and it could affect her, obviously, if he passes and she's still living. So having a plan is important. I think most people think that plan is long-term care insurance. We do that. But it's a use it, lose it model. In other words, you're paying in all the premiums and you're hoping you never need it, but if you do, you got a long-term care policy. But you have to go through underwriting and pass it, and it's based on morbidity questions, you know, how mobile are you and so forth. And guess who's asking us for long-term care? We talked about Medicare earlier. People are asking us at age 65.
Right when they're wanting to retire.
Right.
Yeah, and you said to us on a previous show, you've yet to see somebody in their 40s come into your office.
40s or 50s.
40s or 50s.
Now, there's a 70% chance, the study's been done, 70% chance when we turn 65, God willing we live longer, we will need some type of long-term care assistance. So if you don't have that as a plan in your retirement, that's really not a smart way to go. Plan for it. Now, there's a couple other strategies I want people to understand. You could do a life insurance. You say, I don't need life insurance. All our debt's paid off. You would be buying life insurance using the death benefit for long-term care. Okay. Now, there's still underwriting because it's life insurance, so it's based on mortality. But we've got a very popular one that there's no health questions. It's a long-term care rider. It's all you're doing is shifting money from one bucket to another bucket. It's still your money, it's still there. And if you need long-term care assistance, the insurance company will double that amount for up to 5 years. And you said, what happens after 5 years? If I'm still living, it will revert back to what it originally was. Now, I know I'm covering that in a short period of time, but if you've got an interest out there and you think, I'd like to see what some other strategies are, then obviously give us a call and we'll be more glad to help you.
And I would say you're maximizing that dollar, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I would say you mentioned earlier getting rid of debt, right? You're getting rid of your mortgage payment. Well, if you have to use long-term care and it's $8,000 a month, that's a pretty hefty mortgage payment, right? So if you can utilize a dollar and get more bang for your buck, there's ways to do that.
The things we've learned in 30 minutes, unbelievable. Thank you, guys, for being a part of this conversation. Wow, connect with them. All right, give us a website, give us the phone number.
Yeah, telephone number is 423-641-0999, and the website is HughesRetirementGroup.com, and there's also a QR code that you can scan. Get in touch with us.
All righty, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.